Please welcome to the stage Erica Anderson, CRO at Notion, and Abbas Haider Ali, VP Customer Success at GitHub.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Yes, thank you for the warm welcome, Monica.
It's exciting to have everyone here. I see we have a big crowd. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room as well. We managed to make it the first step. I did not spill any water on the stage or on myself. I do speak with both my, people say speak with their hands. I speak with all my limbs, including my feet. So this requires moving it to the side. Erica, it's great to see you here. I figure we probably should start with like a little bit of an introduction around how we know each other. We're from two different companies, but actually, Erica hired me at GitHub. And we had sort of a unique first day experience, I would say. There's a couple of fun facts I want to share. So first of all, Erica did hire me at GitHub, but we've never met in real life. This is actually the first time that we're meeting here on stage, which is sort of very strange. Also, we had a very unique first day. I'll provide my take on it, then I'll let her provide her take. So, I started at GitHub in January of last year. Very excited to join the team. This is just after Copilot were announced. There's a lot of AI hype. I was super psyched. On my first day, my very first meeting with Erica, Erica said, Abbas, I have some news. And I was like, ooh, okay, that's interesting. Let's start with some news. And she said, Abbas, I'm leaving GitHub. So that was my very first day at GitHub, and it kind of went from there. Erica, does that sound right to you?
It sounds very right. I was in a very long search for a boss and was very excited to bring him to GitHub. But yes, that is definitely what happened on his very first day, which I'd never had that happen before. I'd been at GitHub for 10 years, so that was very unique. But look at us, we're very well bonded today.
We're good now. Now, I will say there was a temptation on my part to say, I've been playing the long game, and my goal was to get her on stage here, and I was just going to get up and walk away. And be like, let's see how you like it. Right? That was part of the original plan. We did decide that, however, we have resolved those particular challenges, and now we're friends. We can hang out and have a conversation around all things customer success. And that's really what we wanted to do today, was really have a pretty open conversation around a few different customer success topics, starting with some really easy ones, like, what are all the teams that go into a customer success organization from your standpoint?
Yes, there's many, and I think it evolves over time as your company's growing and your circumstances. But, across my most recent company journeys, obviously you have customer success proper, like the customer success managers, professional services, your customer experience team. You can have more technical roles. What am I leaving out? Renewals, account managers. The list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But definitely an evolution. For example, at GitHub, from a customer success perspective, we started with professional services, actually, and support, and then evolved from there. At Notion, it's we've got built out teams and more roles than like the GitHub journey, which has been interesting.
Yeah, I think it is sort of an interesting choice of options that you have when you're building your team. And actually, a fun story here is around the origin of a customer success organization. So I think for companies at earlier stages, I think it's really important to write those things down somewhere, because at some point, someone's going to ask you saying, how did customer success start on your team? And it'll be like, well, we started with support or services or CSMs. Just depending on what your business needs, it can vary. And actually, it's a pretty long list. And in fact, I try to keep this list in my head as I go through and talk to different CS leaders. I've probably had this conversation with a number of you on here. And so there's like a menu, and it's sort of like you can get on support, services we talked about. Some people think about training as a separate function. You have TAMs, you have renewals, account managers, customer experience engineering, and the scope sort of determines the leaders you need, the functions you have, the ROEs. It just varies based on business and the complexity of the product. So, that is certainly a very common pattern to look at. It also is sort of a pattern of growth over CS over time, right? Yeah. So your CS org, I'm sure you saw it, evolve over GitHub, right? Like you said, started small, grew from there, and you're seeing it evolve right now at Notion as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you want to match it to what you're literally trying to do for customers, and obviously, like, that be the starting point. At GitHub, as I mentioned, the big need was how do you get people onto a software development platform, and that's why professional services was kind of the orientation at the start. At Notion, support, obviously, like technical support was an underpinning, but customer success was early because Notion is a wonderful product, but there is a learning curve. And so how you onboard customers to the product and actually hands-on support from a customer success management perspective was really important. And now Notion, we're in the journey of now layering on professional services, layering on renewals, and that's like the present day journey that we're on. And that's all an evolution of like, what do we need to meet the needs of customers, plus what the business is doing from a performance perspective.
That's great. Well, speaking of onboarding onto Notion, I think there's probably a few people here, maybe, who are Notion users.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do that as a quick poll. I'm going to get my phone ready so I can take this picture on
Raise
stage.
a hand
so
for
who
Notion
here is a
users?
Notion user?
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Afterwards, I will take any customer feedback. I love to chat with users. I actually do that, a couple user chats every week, which is so insightful for my role in particular. So catch me afterwards. I love to know the magic wand. If you had a wish for Notion, what should we change?
That's right. I mean, ultimately, I guess the CRO is the ultimate CSM. Is that
Yes.
a fair statement? That's
Yes.
true. It all comes down that way. Another common question that comes up all the time, I'm sure you hear about it from people reaching out to you, seeking your expertise, as well as in your operator role itself. What is the right level of investment into CS?
I think, for me, I guess I think about it in a couple of different ways. From investment, you can look at it purely like the dollars you want to spend. Sometimes you can look at it as percentage of ARR. Professional services, you've got different ways you want to look at that investment. So that's one way I can talk about it. I know Abbas has got good insights on the percentage of investment and how he thinks about that. I then also think about it in terms of investment in the different areas of how we want to support customers. So, what's the dedicated hands-on support that we need to provide to customers? What's the way in which we can pool resources and investment and a way to reach customers? And then how are we investing digitally? So that's the other way I also think about it. And that's dependent on different areas of the business and what's the level of touch and experience. So I kind of look at the two vectors, like the pure numbers way, and then what's the models we need to have to support the business across all the different functions you saw earlier slide of the different roles you can have as part of customer success.
I think the functional piece is really interesting, right? Because you can think about the customer journey is really driving that. It's like, well, forget the numbers, right? Ultimately, if we're not doing a great job making our customers successful, the numbers stop to matter, right? You don't have a business, essentially, right? So having the customer journey to map out and really thinking about the functional things that you need is really important, right? So this is something that you saw at GitHub, but adding in the layers, it's something they're continuing to add into on the Notion side as well. From my standpoint, I very commonly get asked the question, I'm sure a number of you do here as well, is how much should we spend, right? Ultimately, a lot of folks who are here at this event are business leaders within their organizations. And so I get asked the question all the time. And so for those who've interacted with me before, you'll know that I have no shortage of opinions, and I'm also not shy about sharing them. So I actually have a very specific number. So I tell companies all the time, 10%, that's the number. You have 10% of your revenue that you can spend on all things post-sales. And I can debate what's in there or not in terms of the menu we talk about, but ultimately, if you're going to run a business that can raise money effectively, that is Rule of 40, that can go public, whatever scale you're looking at, if you're spending more than 10%, you better have a damn good reason for why you're doing it. You have to be growing much faster than your peers. The quality of what you're generating as leads from CS to drive sales has to be strong. All the things have to be better if you're above that number. And the more you can monetize, right, the conversation when you talk about professional services, you monetize and lose a little money, but then eventually you start catching up. That protects that 10% for new things that you want to do, so you can pull functions in and generally build a more sustainable business. And actually, for CS leaders, this is a number that you should have on your t-shirt, right? So actually, I'll ask this as a question. If on the spot, if someone came to you and said, how much do you spend of your revenue on customer success? How many of you have that number right at the tip of your fingertips? Quick raise of hands. So taking a look around, that was about 15 hands, maybe at best. And I know there's way more customer success leaders here in this room. And so as business leaders, as you look to mature from growing in the customer success discipline, that's a number that you have to know inside out. And you have to really, really strong perspective on the ROI of that. So going back to the pieces we talked about before, you have to know what is actually going to what are you actually delivering for it.
I'd also add, know it by the breakdown of your different functions, right? Like customer experience, for example, at Notion, which is the support organization, we track that month by month, right? And right now our goal is 3.9% of ARR, for example, and that's and I encourage exactly what Abbas was saying, but even for every function, so you kind of know the breakdown and you know where you're getting your optimizations and then where you're redeploying those dollars.
Yeah. Speaking of, since you gave the number and you're tracking it, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on measuring customer success, right? What are the KPIs? How do you actually measure that customer success is working?
The age-old question? I'd say, several things. I think, the tried and true things, and I can share how we measure it at Notion right now. In terms of adoption metrics and revenue expansion. And I'm a believer in both, and I can talk about that. But I'd also say that I'm very tuned to metrics at the very beginning of a customer's journey. And that's something at Notion that we've spent a lot of time working on for the product itself and what we need to make customers successful. Like the onboarding is a really critical piece of a customer journey, especially at Notion. And so that's a place where we spend a lot of time coming up with those metrics. And that to me is a really important indicator of what's working. And that's at the earliest part of the journey. So for example, for Notion, a metric is integrations that a customer's enabled, for example. Right. So it's not just the usage and what you're seeing, but it's some of these other tangibles that you understand that someone's getting off on the right foot and they're going to be successful long term with your product. So integrations is an example. We've also been looking at how do you define, even in the first 90 days, the onboarding journey, how someone becomes a more advanced user, right? So for Notion, it's can you see their database usage and editing? And so I'm super interested in the earliest part of the journey to understand how we're predicting, the longer term success. Ultimately, the KPIs kind of at the far end, we look at what's the monthly actives
right.
In terms of next quarter renewal. So that's kind of the vantage point we take. So in the next quarter, what's the monthly actives? We want to see that at a certain percentage. And then also what's our NRR effectively? How are we contributing to the growth of a customer overall?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think you hit on a couple of key points there. First of all, being that you're not just focused on the lagging indicators. I think very commonly when people talk about KPIs for customer success teams, people quickly throw up GRR, NRR, those are my numbers. I'm like, that's cool, but that's, you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. You need the right set of leading indicators, looking for activity, onboarding, velocity, those durable usage over time, increasing level of depth of adoption. Those are the things that tell you that you're doing all the right stuff. And I think that's the right way to think about it. In terms of KPIs on the GitHub side, I remember when I joined, it was sort of funny. I joined. Erica said she was leaving. I guess I'm not totally over it. I'll keep bringing it up every little while.
Just rubbing it in.
Just a little bit. So basically, I joined. I was like, hey, where are my KPIs? And actually, like a lot of organizations, a majority of them were sort of focused on the look back, the lagging indicators. And so one of my first activities as joining a new team was going through and sitting down with the leaders in customer success, which at GitHub is professional services, support, CSMs. I have an engineering team that reports to me, a strategy organization, and sitting down and saying, what are all of the KPIs? How do we know that we're okay based on what we've done historically? That's our lagging indicators. And what tells us we're going to be okay next month, next quarter, for the next year? And actually doing that is an interesting exercise. If you join GitHub today in the customer success team, one of the things you get access to is a document that I started in my first 30 days. I describe it as my fever dream document of 30 pages of KPIs. And I was like, we should pick something out of this. And now it's a contributed document from everybody, and it's 50 pages of missions, unique values, KPIs, leading and lagging indicators for every single function that we review on a monthly basis. And I think that's really important. You mentioned you look at it every single week.
Yeah.
It's not KPIs for the sake of vanity, right? I mean, I love to kind of stand up there and be like, look at all these great numbers, I'm so excited. But that's not the point. Actually, in the business reviews, we commonly, and I think you've done something similar, is like, I don't want to talk about the green, right? The green means that we put the right targets in place and we're happy with them. I only actually want to talk about the yellow and the red. And if there's no yellow or red, it makes me really uncomfortable. I get super paranoid because like we should be pushing enough where some things are hovering in the danger zone, right? Like, and if we're not being aggressive enough in all things in our business, whether it's customer acquisition, pipeline, revenue, and customer success. Like all the things have to actually be slightly on the edge. Otherwise, you're just not trying hard enough in marketing. Yeah. The other topic I did want to talk a little bit about here was, there is always a little tension between chief customer officers and CROs, especially when they leave them hanging on their first day. That tension definitely exists on those things. And so, as we talk about those sorts of friction points, like what are the opposite sides of those, right? Like what's a signal that tells you that, magic is happening between the organizations, and really what's magic happening in the broadest picture of customer success?
Yeah, I think, internally, magic is happening, and, especially as you're growing really fast, I think some of these, like, when magic is happening are really important. I think it's around, does everybody know where they fit in the customer journey? In terms of, there's a lot of people that interact with customers and deliver customer experience, and does everybody have an understanding of, like, what they're doing? And is that aligned across the organization? And are you like building on that momentum versus overlapping on how you're helping drive that journey? So I would say that's like one thing in terms of the magic happening internally. And that's probably the most important. It's like, what is everybody doing, the roles, the clarity, and then how do you share the like success of what's happening across those teams and where you're improving and where you have opportunity to do more, to push the envelope. So I'd say those are things that stick out internally. I think externally, when you see magic happening, I had a very great example. I don't see Monica anymore here, but about a month ago, we had like a magic experience from an external perspective where a customer of Notion that was recently onboarded to using the product wall to wall at their company, the CEO of the company went on LinkedIn and just posted, this has nothing to do with Notion. I just want to share how amazing this journey has been to get on this product, and the adoption at the company has been so amazing to see, and wall to wall, and people are so highly engaged. And that will probably be a memory that never leaves me, that like externally we made magic happen because there was no conversation that happened with us at all. Someone, a CEO, took the time to write that up and to recognize the company and the team. So that to me is magic from an external perspective.
I mean, there's no validation like customer validation when it comes to these things. And definitely that little screenshot from LinkedIn goes into that CSM's brag document for a review season, right?
Yes.
Like, it's like, definitely remember this, Erica.
For like 20 years.
That's right.
If I was a CSM, I'd use that.
That definitely shows up every time you have an interview question along those things. But there's lots of elements, right? You talked about the clarity of roles, accountability for the team, the joint recognition that the teams show up together. And I think a little bit of this is also about the mutual respect of everyone kind of like knowing that you trust each other in the game. One analogy I use, like, we don't always talk about customer obsession. Like, that's a big part of every organization that is really focused on delivering value. But sometimes customer obsession can turn creepy, is how I think about it, right? Imagine your entire revenue organization, you're always in everything in front of the customer at the same time. It's like one of them and four of you in every meeting. That is kind of creepy, right? Like, that is the wrong side of obsession on the customer side. So having those lines set up where you know what you're all doing, and then you have a common language by which you talk about different stages of the customer lifecycle. There's no sales framework that's like pre and post sale. If you decide qualification is MedPick, everyone speaks the language of metric. Whatever you pick, it's common. And then the thing that I've always loved is this idea of like leadership interchangeability. Sort of like, can you walk in the shoes of your revenue peers, right? So as a CS leader, can you actually drive a sales forecast call? If you're a sales leader, can you run a risk review meeting as well as your peers? If you do, that sends an incredible signal for magic happening within the organization itself. So those are some of the things that I look at. And of course, the ultimate one is always the customer stories, right? Every time a customer posts about GitHub on LinkedIn and someone likes it, I'm like, yep, that's a screenshot. That's going in this view. Unsolicited, public praise from a customer, nothing quite beats that. So look, I'm watching the countdown. It's counting down very quickly. But we have a long list of questions. So I'm going to switch. If it's okay with you.
Yes.
Let's switch to lightning round. Is that all right?
Let's
so
do it.
I had a series of questions. We're definitely not going to have time. People will have to get us afterwards, and we'll run through this. So I'm going to go through our lightning round questions. I think we literally have time for maybe yes in a sentence, no in a sentence, something like that.
Okay.
So some hot takes.
Okay.
All right, here we go. First one, customer success. Monetize or not monetize?
Ooh.
Yes or no, that's all you got.
Well, there's different parts of that. Okay, yes. Yes. Monetize, yes.
Monetize, yes, that's good. It maximizes that 10% investment you've got, right? What about professional services? Positive margin contribution, yes or no?
Depends. Depends. Yes and no. It shifts over time. Ultimately, I would love that to be yes.
Okay, no to a yes. Okay, I'll take that as a
no to a yes.
That's good.
It's a journey.
I'm going to keep asking the weird questions that require like 10 minutes to answer.
Okay.
Support monetize, yes or no?
Yes.
I like that one. Very good. Customers always are willing to pay to be front of line for support. So that no one wants. If someone says VIP, will you pay for the pass? Of course you'll pay for the VIP pass. That's always how it works. This is an interesting one. So teams go through model. Customer success teams have this mode where you're operating in a GM mode, where different GOs and stuff are kind of grouped together as a pod of all the revenue functions. So sort of pod structure versus a functional structure where all of CS is together, all of sales is together. Which way do you like it?
These require explanation.
Lightning rounds have no space for nuance.
I like both. It's dependent on what you're trying to do. So, for example, at GitHub, it was a functional structure.
Yep, still is.
Still is, yes. At Notion, we're in a pod structure and a GM structure. I think it's dependent on where you're at in terms of growth. What are you trying to accomplish? So,
I think that's right. I also think it tends to be a pendulum. You just go from one to the other.
Yeah, that's true.
Last questions. We're right at time pretty much. So obviously we had a fun first day. We never got to meet in real life until today. Do we call and text more post GitHub or while we actually had overlap in GitHub?
Post GitHub.
There you go. See? A valuable life lesson take. Traumatic experiences still can allow friendships to be formed. And so that basically, I think that wraps the topics that I wanted to cover to make sure we stay on track from a scheduling perspective. Erica, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
The CRO-CCO relationship, super important to make a business scale. Thank you for coming out here, and thank you all for joining us for the session.
Thank you.